Story of the Flute Maker. Beneath the low branches of an old cedar, he awoke to a cool breeze caressing his face. For a moment Cloud wondered where he was and why. Then he remembered what had brought him to this grassy bed beneath the cedar, and the pain of remembering took his breath away. "My father has accepted the gifts brought by Hollowhorn," Dawn Woman had told Cloud, after he had waited for an entire evening by the trail to the river. "Hollowhorn is a fine man and a good provider. He will take good care of me. But you are always in my thoughts. You have been in my heart since we were small children. Have you forgotten the promises we made to each other?" he had pleaded. "We were only children," she had replied. "And what is the promise of a boy against the harshness of life?" "My promise is everything I have," he had said. "There was a time it made your heart fly, and you cannot tell me that the thought of me will not do so again and again." Cloud had watched as Dawn Woman walked away into the twilight, soon to be the wife of Hollowhorn. Driven by a cold, sickening pain that shriveled his very being, he had crossed the river and run across the prairies. Trying to outrun the pain in his heart, he ran until his legs drained of all their strength, and all he could do was roll beneath a tree. Only with sleep did the pain subside, but now it returned like a raging flood. There was nothing he could do but curl up in a ball. He lay like a stone as the morning wore on. A blackbird alighted in the branches above him. Ants crawled over him. But he paid no heed, his eyes open, but unseeing. When the sun was near to the middle of the sky, the wind sprang up. Only when he heard a faint, mournful voice did he begin to stir, and then only because the voice echoed what he felt in his broken heart. The voice grew louder as the wind blew harder, and it faded when the wind abated. Cloud thought it was his own voice crying out the pain in his heart, because it was such a hollow, haunted tone rising and floating aimlessly. Not knowing why, he decided to find out who or what the voice belonged to. Scrambling from beneath the cedar branch, he stumbled through the grove of trees along a creek. Something drew him to a particular old, wind-bent cedar as the plaintive voice grew louder. There, halfway up, was a dead branch smaller than his wrist, a hollow branch with holes, perhaps drilled by woodpeckers. And with each gust of wind, the branch seemed to cry. Cloud had found the voice. He sat and listened, held fast by the mournful tones that rose and fell with the whim of the wind. At sundown the wind weakened, and so did the voice. Cloud climbed the old cedar and inspected the hollow branch. It was long dead, he could tell, killed by the worms that the woodpeckers were drilling for. In doing so, they had opened holes through which the wind flowed and unlocked the strange, mournful voice. Cloud broke off the branch and climbed down. He sat on a creek bank and blew through the hollow opening, but the voice didn't cry. He noticed that it was like the eagle-bone whistle his father had given him, and thought it might function much the same. Placing a small piece of wood over the top hole, he was able to coax sound from the hollow branch. At first, it was simply noise, but eventually he began to make it sing, somewhat like the wind had. As the sun went down, Cloud paused long enough to gather dry wood and build a fire. He had no food, and his only means of protection was a stone knife in his belt. It did not matter, for his heart was broken. If the great silver-tipped bear came in the night, or some enemy was even now stalking him, he was already dead inside. Dawn Woman was to be the wife of Hollowhorn and bear his children. Life had no meaning. He kept the fire going far into the night as he sat and blew on the hollow branch. He found that placing his fingertips over the 5 holes would lower or raise the pitch. Moreover, when he coaxed the voice from the branch, it strangely eased the pain in his heart. So, of course, he blew and made the branch sing, until once again he dropped over from exhaustion. Morning found him curled next to the cold gray ashes of his fire pit, his arms around the hollow branch. He awoke lost, unkempt, and hungry, his heart still torn. Stumbling to the creek, he washed his face and took a long drink, and in the water he saw a lonely young man. He stayed in a grove all day, blowing on the hollow branch. By sundown, he could make the branch sing better than the wind had. Through it came the voice of his grief-stricken heart, rising and falling with high and low plaintive notes. Cloud decided that the voice of the branch sounded much like the great cranes that flew overhead each spring and fall. With his knife he carved the end of the branch into the shape of a crane's head and bill. As he made the branch sing, the land and everything on it fell silent, listening to the voice of a broken heart. Another night came, another lonely fire. Another dawn found him next to cold ashes with his pain. Hunger he could push aside, but the only medicine for the pain in his heart was the singing hollow branch. Because he and the wind had given the branch a voice, he decided to call it hokagapi, or to make a voice. It was, of course, a flute. Another day passed. Cloud blew on his flute and let it cry for him, giving voice to the bottomless pain in his heart. Now and then he paused to work on the flute, reshaping the mouthpiece or making all the finger holes the same size. He had not eaten for 3 days, weak and delirious. He thought he saw Dawn Woman standing by the side of his fire. When he reached out for her, she ran away, or so he thought. So he followed. After a time, he simply wandered across the prairie, playing the flute, not caring where he was going. Cloud awoke from a delirious sleep to find himself next to a river. Washing his face and taking a drink, he staggered to the shade of a tree and began blowing on his flute to chase away the pain in his heart. The notes flowed from his flute, rising, falling, and sobbing, crying out the anguish from deep inside. Suddenly Cloud heard voices and opened his eyes to realize that he was on the riverbank opposite his own village. In his delirium, he had found his way home. All the women in the village, young and old, were standing on the other bank staring at him and listening to him play his flute. Among them was Dawn Woman. The pain of losing her engulfed him like a flash flood. All he could do was blow on the flute and let it cry his anguish. The lilting voice of the flute rose and fell, sighing and sobbing in soft, heartbreaking notes. Cloud noticed that the women were as drawn to the voice of the hollow branch as he had been when he first heard it. There was not a single man in the crowd, only women, old women, young women, and girls all entranced by the crying flute, including Dawn Woman. Certain that by now she was the wife of Hollowhorn, Cloud's grief poured out through his flute. Soon Dawn Woman crossed the river and stood before him, her eyes down but casting frequent bold glances as the flute sang. "There was a time when a young man I knew made my heart fly," she said softly. Cloud stopped playing. "Now he sings a strange song that makes my heart sad. What are you doing to me?" "I am giving my pain a voice," he replied, "because the young woman in my heart has become the wife of another. The spirits have given me this hokagapi to do so. I can no longer make her heart fly." "Can your hokagapi sing out in joy?" Dawn Woman asked. "I can give it no joy, for I do not feel it, and it is I who give this thing its voice." "But I feel joy at your return," she said. "After you left, I knew that life's path without you would be lonely. For you see, you are in my heart, and always will be. I've taken no husband, unless it would be you." Cloud could not believe his ears, but he saw the truth in Dawn Woman's eyes. His heart flew, and he began playing his flute. This time the flute song was that a promise of hope and joy rising and falling, like the wind dancing on the prairies, a song of life. Once again all the women were enthralled, drawn to the voice of the flute. The years went by. Into the union of Cloud and Dawn Woman were born 2 sons. As they grew, Cloud taught them to play the flute, and he became known far and wide as the flute maker. Young men and boys came to Cloud and asked to learn, and so he taught them all to make and play the flute. And he told them how the spirits had guided him to find the Hokarapi, taking him from the despair of a broken heart to the joy of a dream fulfilled. That is why, he would tell him, there will always be a hollow tone of sadness in the voice of each flute, to remind everyone that while the flute is played to win love, winning love is also winning the chance of a broken heart. Such is love. Thereafter, on summer evenings, when the fireflies twinkled in the dusk, flutes could be heard singing sweetly, provocatively, up and down the river valleys, their voices touching the heart of any woman, young or old. Hokarapi, the flute, born of despair, became the voice of courtship, a promise of hope and of love.